On the day of the UK budget, we are in Edinburgh, where the Scottish Government are trying to get their own budget passed here at Holyrood. How will the Chancellor's changes go down with our audience tonight? And where do they want to see money being spent here in Scotland? Let's find out. Welcome to Debate Night. Debate Night is the only show in Scotland where you get to ask the big questions, answering them on our panel this evening. Fiona Hyslop is the SNP MSP for Linlithgow and Cabinet Secretary for Transport. Fiona is one of the longest-serving members of the Scottish Government and has been in every SNP cabinet since 2007. Rachael Hamilton is the Scottish Conservative MSP for Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire. Last month she became the party's deputy leader following the election of new leader Russell Finlay. Some say budget day is like Glastonbury for economists. Professor Mairi Spowage is on our main stage tonight. Mairi is director of the Fraser of Allender Institute and the former head of national accounts at the Scottish Government. Also with us tonight, the former leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Willie Rennie. Willie is the MSP for North East Fife and the party spokesperson on economy, education and communities. As leader, Willie led his party through 11 elections and referendum campaigns, but stepped down 3 years ago, saying it was time for fresh leadership. And finally, from Scottish Labour, Paul O'Kane is MSP for West Scotland and the party spokesperson for social justice, social security and equalities as well. Paul was previously a councillor and was deputy leader of East Renfrewshire Council for 10 years. Please welcome them all to Debate Night. And welcome to our studio audience here in Edinburgh. It's great to have you with us this evening. And you can join in the discussion from home. BBCDN is the hashtag you need right now on social media. And our Debate Night podcast of the show will be available for you to download straight after this broadcast. So let's get started. Budget day. We've got a lot to get through. Our first question of the night comes from Gregor Armstrong. Gregor, evening.
Good evening. Is this budget a trick or is it a treat?
Thank you, Gregor. Budget of big tax, big spending, big borrowing as well. We're going to look at it in two parts, the big picture and also specifically what it means for us here in Scotland. Let's get first reaction from the audience here this evening. Your first chance to have a look at the budget this evening. Who sees something in it for them? Who sees some positives from what has been announced? A huge budget settlement from Rachael Reeves here today. Well, that speaks volumes, doesn't it? Fiona Hyslop, Labour say this is a budget that proves austerity is over. Is that how you see it?
In parts. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think the commitment to invest in public services is what we need. And I also think the investment for capital is what we need. I think this year is a challenge, so it's in different parts. This year, there's additional funding. But we had expected most of that because of the pay increases we've got this year. I think the challenge going forward with the national insurance contributions, which is the big tax take that they're looking at, is the public sector, the NHS, has to pay the national insurance as well. And what we don't know yet is whether the £500 million we think it will cost will be picked up. And that has yet to be announced. I think there's a good investment planned for next year, but I think in the third part of this is what's happening in the years after. And there's a real danger that you're seeing a tail off in the investment for public services. So to end 14 years of austerity, you need to have consistency of that public investment. And I also think the change in the fiscal rules, again, something that I, as the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, was keen on, because counting assets as liabilities, etc., hampers you. So there's some good aspects from that. But as with the reaction is, most people have got to digest this. The government has to, Scottish Government has to digest this to identify what does it mean for us, where are the benefits. But we have to start investing again in public services, so therefore we can get in Scotland the consequentials that can go into our health service and our education service and what people need. And by shifting that dial, you start to see a step in the right direction. But the jury's out. Is this a one-year wonder? And so is it temporary or is it permanent?
Gregor, you asked the question. Trick or treat, what do you think?
It's definitely a trick for me, because repeatedly Labour said they weren't going to, one, change the fiscal rules. That's what they've done. They said they weren't going to increase national insurance. They've done that as well. And there's now a huge array of tax hikes, which we weren't expecting. So to me, it's really clear that Labour has lied to get into power.
Paul
and
O'Kane.
then changed.
OK. Paul, trick or treat?
Well, look, this budget is a budget for change. That's what we promised in the election. And you have seen a budget today that is going to invest in our public services. It's going to put an end to austerity. It's going to fix the foundations of our economy and turn the page. Because for too long, for 14 years under the Tories, we've had sticking plaster solutions to the problems and the challenges that we face. £47.7 billion to the Scottish Government budget in this budget as a result of the decisions taken today. That is the largest grant given to the Scottish Government in the history of devolution. That means 1.5 billion extra money this year. It means 3.4 billion next year. So it is clear that there's going to be a lot more money in Scotland in order to invest in our public services. I think Fiona almost sounds disappointed with that, because I think her lines tonight were pre-prepared to say there was going to be a continuation of austerity. That's absolutely not the case. And it's now down to the SNP to look. It's down to the SNP to look at their own budget and to consider how they're going to spend this. And it has to be spent on our hospitals and on our schools and on our roads and on fixing the really serious problems, which the SNP have had responsibility for now for 17 years, and we've gone backwards on many of those fronts. And what I would just say in terms of Fiona's points about national insurance, the Treasury have been quite clear that there will be additional funding to cover that national insurance cost to the public sector, including in hospitals and schools and all the issues that I mentioned here in Scotland.
What about Gregor's points, though, that you went into the election this summer with none of these things in your manifesto that have been delivered today? This is not what you promised people.
Well, look, I think we were very clear in the election and in our manifesto about the taxes that we wouldn't raise, and that was income tax. It was about national insurance in people's pay packets, and it was about ensuring that we kept those promises. And we've done that today, because what people will see in their pay packet is that we have protected working people by protecting the money that they take home every month. And this is a budget that protects working people. It ensures that whether you drive your car to work, you're able to do that without an increase in fuel duty. The pay that you take home at the end of the month is protected, and you're not seeing an increase in your income tax and your national insurance, and that we're building growth and the future.
Well, let's find out if people see it that way. Gentlemen over there. Yes, on you go.
I think the thing that surprised me the most is the first budget that I've seen in living memory where the party has actually followed through on what they promised. You know, we haven't seen a rise in taxes on working people, even though we all know we're in a very difficult situation, and we've seen rises in public services. So it's not great enough at the moment, but I think it's the budget that we needed, and it's the best that we could really hope for given the current circumstances. And I think Rachael Reeves should be commended on what she's managed to do today.
Thank you. Gentleman with the beard over here. Yes.
I don't think how you can possibly say it's an end to austerity when the first major policy announcement you had was to cut the winter fuel allowance for pensioners. You're also going to target people on sickness benefit. So I'm sorry, I don't believe you at all. And when you talk about Scottish budget, the SNP government have spent 75 million over the last few years mitigating the bedroom tax, about 8 million mitigating the two-child benefit cap, which you're continuing to go along with. So, no, it's not an end to austerity. Start telling the truth.
OK, well, I'll come back to you, Paul, on this man in the white top there. Yes.
I actually feel it's all smoke and mirrors run by an ex-former bank clerk. That's what my feeling is.
And there was a lady with glasses in the same row as you. Yes, on you go.
It was just to ask, I work in the third sector in Scotland and in Edinburgh, and we have heard about a protection for the public sector in terms of that. The third sector employs a huge amount of people, and we're not hearing anything about any protection for third sector employers. OK, well, let's pick up those specific points about Scotland in just a second, but I want to go round everyone for initial reaction on the big picture on this. Mairi Spowage from the Fraser of Allender Institute. This is a huge budget and huge implications for the economy, beyond what you expected?
Yes, on the tax side, the spending side, the borrowing side, everything was at the upper end of what our expectations were for the announcements today. So lots of it was well trailed. So in some ways there wasn't surprises from that perspective, but just the size of things were much larger than we were expected. And that meant that for us, the consequentials generated for the Scottish budget were bigger than we were expecting.
Will your estimations of growth for Scotland now be changed by what you heard today?
Well, you can see that the OBR's forecast for the UK show an increase in growth into next year, which is driven quite a lot by the increased investment in the economy that we're seeing from the public sector. But the growth then sort of tails off into the third, fourth and fifth years of the forecast and is slightly lower than before. So that's one of the issues. You know, you can see that the Chancellor's making the case that this is a budget to invest and to invest in public services with much higher levels of capital spending than was previously the case. But can you argue it's a budget for growth when in the 5-year horizon of the forecast, you're not really seeing that paying off in the economy? There was some stuff done by the OBR which suggests perhaps in years, you know, sort of 6, 7, 8, 9, you know, in sort of 8 to 10 years' time it might pay off. But I think that might be a problem for the Chancellor, that it's not really demonstrating that it's a budget that's going to generate growth in the economy.
Back to the audience. Man in the front row here.
There's 177 billionaires in the UK, and I feel like it's strange that there's not fixing on the supply side. We should really be doing some tax on the ultra-wealthy to ease the burden on people that are using critical services all over the country.
That was what was missing for you from this budget, was it? Something around that. Okay, Rachael Hamilton. Russell Finlay said today he found this budget to be terrifying. Do you?
I think a lot of people that I've spoken to believe it is a fairly painful budget. I agree with what Mairi's just said. Sir Keir Starmer said that he was obsessed with growing the economy, but this budget doesn't do anything to grow the economy. By 2026, the growth looks like it's just going to be about over 1%. I think that is poor for ambition. I think it's poor for job growth and protecting the key sectors that we have in Scotland. So the things that they have hit today are the whisky industry, which is key to Scotland. They've hit the North East oil and gas sector. They've hit employers with a contribution, bringing down the threshold and increasing the amount that employers contribute. Now, you may say, how will that affect me? But having spoken to people today, they are worried that people will not get as many hours or that employers will cut down the number of people that they employ. So I do think this is going to have a distinct impact on economic growth in Scotland. But I would welcome the 3.4 billion in Barnett consequentials which are coming to Scotland. My worry with that as we move forward to the Scottish budget is that the SNP so far in their 17 years of governance haven't shown how they can improve the NHS, improve education, and do all the things that we want to do. We've got 860,000 people on NHS waiting lists. We are well down in international rankings in terms of our performance in schools.
We'll pick up on that in just a second, Rachael. Rachel Reeves, the other Rachel, has said today that this is not a budget she wants to repeat, but she's had to do it to wipe the slate clean in terms of the economy. That's because of the Conservatives, isn't it?
No, the Conservatives, you know, we got 4 million people in employment between 2010 and 2024. We were the fastest growing country in the G7. And you know, these are key Liz Truss made a mistake because she didn't underwrite that budget with the OBR forecast.
You're going to apologise?
Liz Truss was wrong, but Rachel Reeves has misled the public because she said that she wouldn't raise taxes beyond 8 billion. She's raised them by 40 billion, and this is a budget that's high inflation, high tax and high debt.
Okay, gentleman with the yellow tie over here.
Just to help the people of Scotland understand the taxation, can we have this afternoon's explanation of what working people are?
A term that's been bandied around in this budget. What's your definition, Paul O'Kane, of working people?
Well, look, we've been really clear, and we've been talking about people's pay slips, and that's what's important. It's about the money that people take home at the end of the day and making sure that we protect that money that's in somebody's pay slip. So, you know, that's why we have decided not to raise income tax or national insurance contributions that directly impact people's pay packages.
But what's a working person? Well, what's Labour's definition of who is a working person?
Well, Stephen, I'm not going to, you know, patronise people. I think we know that people who go out to work...
I don't think we'll feel patronised. They just want an explanation.
Well, the point I made earlier is absolutely clear. People who go out to work, people who are driving their cars, who are relying on petrol, and we've made that choice not to increase fuel duty, people who are looking at their pay packet at the end of the month and seeing more money going into their pocket and staying in their pocket, and people who need investment in the public services that we all rely on. So our NHS, our schools, our justice system, our roads, that is who we are prioritising in this budget. We're asking those with the broadest shoulders to bear the brunt and to help pull that through.
Not pensioners who are going to be hit with the cut in the winter fuel allowance, and not parents.
That's now a devolved payment, Fiona. You know, you have
Well,
responsibility.
everybody knows who cut that winter fuel allowance.
Well, you decided not to back 41 million.
Can I just say, and not the children
of consequential.
The third and the fourth, or possibly fourth child, who from families living in poverty that need to have that two-child limit removed. So the issue is, you're not helping the pensioners, they're not working because they're retired, and you're not helping those families in poverty.
With respect,
that's
Fiona,
a very serious
you have not passed
from
on
this budget.
And Fiona, you have been in every single cabinet, we heard it earlier, since the SNP came to power in 2007. You've chosen not to pass on the £41 million of Barnett consequentials in the household support fund that could help people with their fuel and their heating costs. And child poverty rates in Scotland have stagnated for the entire time you have been in office.
Have we kind of noticed, have we not noticed that we had
you've been in
14 years of Tory austerity, and
you have had control of so many levers.
We have the only part of the UK that has a child payment of £25.
Why is poverty stagnating?
That is keeping children out of poverty. I'm sorry, you know fine well that we've had 14 years of austerity. We've had the issues that the Conservative have got. This budget.
That's why we chose. That is why we chose to end austerity today.
All I'm saying is, budgets are choices and they are selections. And the people that have been left out of this budget are the pensioners and the families living in poverty.
We will dig in. We'll dig in a second into where this money will go in Scotland. Willie, Rennie, trick or treat this budget? What do you think?
I mean, the conditions were horrific. I mean, Rachael can gloss over the last period, but Liz Truss did a huge amount of damage to the economy. It's cost many of my constituents thousands of pounds in extra mortgage payments, so we can't forget the record that this government has been inherited. This is a bold budget, there's no doubt. I mean, it's probably one of the biggest ones. I think Mairi's talked about it was much bigger than she expected, and I think it's pretty clear that there are some risky decisions that they've taken, particularly around about taxation. But we welcome the investments in public services. In particular, we are fixated on resolving the problems with our health and social care system, which are not just about health and social care, but are about our economic activity in the country. There are many people who just can't get to work because they can't get the NHS treatment that they require. And in part, that's related to the breakdown in the social care system. And today's budget, I think, provides some additional finance for that, but also support for carers with the carers allowance that Ed Davey, my party leader, has been arguing for. So we welcome bits of the budget today. We think it is a step in the right direction. The conditions you would never wish to have inherited from the Conservatives. But there's a long way to go yet. We need to have economic growth, and that's in part why I think some of the investments in health and social care to reverse the increases in economic inactivity in Scotland that are incredibly worrying. We need to grow the economy in order to invest in public services. This is a start, but there's a huge amount of work that's required to be done.
Back to the audience. Lady in the middle there, yes, on you go.
Picking up on what the lady over there said earlier, you're talking a lot about investing in health and social care and public services, but I'm not hearing anything about you protecting investment into the voluntary sector, when we all know how massive the voluntary sector is and how much the voluntary sector saves health and social care. And in fact, we're looking at cuts to the voluntary sector, which is going to affect a lot of people losing their jobs and a lot of people losing services, and that will lead to an increased demand on health and social care, and it just doesn't make sense to me.
I will pick up on that, where the money's going to go in just a second. Man on the front row.
I welcome the investment in public services, specific points like that, but I want to make a general point about how we evaluate budgets and policies like that. And it's like a number of you have said it, is how it's going to affect growth. And this way of measuring a society's success by growth worries me. It's indiscriminate, it's valueless, everything can get lumped together. If we invest money in weapons or we invest money in houses, it can all get lumped under the same economic growth. It is mathematically feasible for a country to have a huge economic growth and at the same time have environmental damage, have great inequality. I'm not saying that we have that, But I'm just saying it is not a way to measure the success of a budget is by just this valueless and indiscriminate quantity growth.
Mairi Spowage from Fraser Vallender, listening to you with great interest there. Mairi, put these figures in perspective for us here in Scotland. It's 1.5 billion this year. Overall, the biggest budget settlement for Scotland since devolution, the biggest uplift
in total,
since
yes,
devolution in total.
Yeah.
What potentially can that mean for Scotland?
I mean, it's a significant uplift in the resources available to the Scottish Government. The question for them, I suppose, will be to what extent is it used to, you know, settle pay deals that probably are already in the works, particularly for this financial year. How much of the money next year will be also, you know, sort of put towards that, rather than maybe other priorities the government might want to pursue. And what they're going to prioritise in terms of their capital spending programme, because we've been waiting for quite a long time for some prioritisation on infrastructure investment pipeline from the Scottish Government, because costs have gone up hugely the last few years, and what we don't know is you know, what are the priorities for capital investment in Scotland to ensure that we build that infrastructure that we need.
So let me just stop you there, because we've got the Transport Secretary here with us tonight. You're going to be going and arguing for some of this money, I would imagine. Where should it be spent? Things like the A9, which have been a big problem in terms of delays and cost as well. Where should this money go?
Well, that's already been budgeted for. So the issue, and you know, much as well, I'd like to put my pitch to the Cabinet Secretary for Finance live on television. To be fair, I think there are issues, particularly in the health service, in terms of capital.
We know that you wrote it.
So in terms of capital investment, you're looking at health, most definitely. There are issues there. And certainly it allows us to try and address some of the problems we've got, because you know, we're facing and had been facing a 9% reduction in our capital budget. What we need to work out is, with the additional funding for next year, how much does that, you know, fill in the backlog of what we would need to catch up in terms of that capital investment. But I certainly could, as the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, there's a whole load of projects all over the country that need done. And I would argue that transport helps economic growth. And I think in terms of that point about...
This is your pitch.
And this
is going to dual the A9, Fiona.
Well, we are. And the people and places aspect of that last contribution is... A lot of people now, for example, in transport are travelling for leisure. Our busiest days on the transport is at the weekends, believe it or not. But we also know that the hospitality sector, the event sector, tourism is a vital part of our country, and we rely on transport to do that.
So ending peak rail fares, for instance, things like that?
Well, that's a revenue. I said that I would look again where the resources made available, but we are making sure that in the meantime we are, if you're using your flexi passes with the reductions there and the season tickets, you're getting in some cases cheaper than it was with the peak fares removal. So there's a lot of things that I can't tell you, because we just heard the UK budget this afternoon. The Scottish budget is on the 4th of December, so part of what the Scottish Government's got to do is take the figures, identify what was already being accounted for, what is genuinely additional, and look at the priorities that the people of Scotland want. I think transport is one of them.
Right, well...
But also, I think hospitals...
Let's find out.
I know is an issue that everyone wants to see.
We have the people of Edinburgh tonight, so let's hear what are the priorities in terms of spending. When you go, yes.
My question is mainly for Paul. I just don't understand why 14 years of Tory austerity is a good enough reason for you to cut the winter fuel payment, but not a good enough reason for the SNP to then match that.
Paul O'Kane?
Well, the point on the winter fuel payment, and I think it's been well made, is that when we came into office, we inherited not only a horrendous financial position, but a 22 billion black hole in the public finances. And year one, no, it's not made up. And I'm not going to take a lecture. I am not going to take a lecture from Rachael Hamilton, a Trussite who supported Liz Truss and her budget all the way through, and I'm expected to accept some kind of economic lecture from Rachael Hamilton. The reality is that £22 billion gap, they spent the reserves, the emergency reserves, 3 times over. And of course, that was a difficult decision, but it had to be taken. So the reality is now, we're very clear, and Rachael Reeves was very clear today, that this is about investment, and that is why you have seen the uplift in investment, the huge amount of revenue that's going to flow to the Scottish Government, where they can now make these decisions. And we are going to put pressure on them to prioritise the issues that we have in Scotland in terms of our NHS. There are almost 1 in 6 Scots on our NHS waiting list. We have trolleys and corridors. We have huge issues with delayed discharge. A lot of that has been at the hands of the SNP because they have been in power for almost 20 years now. And the reality is they also have a huge budget issue in terms of the black hole that they themselves have created through their waste, their incompetence and their low growth. So we need to deal with those issues seriously.
Mairi Spowage, who's right on that?
On the £22 billion? So from the information that the Chancellor published and looking at what the OBR have said today, there was definitely things that the OBR were not aware of. And the things in the Home Office in particular were much larger than could have been expected. And the reserve was being used for predictable spending, which is not appropriate on one hand. On the other hand, some of the so-called black hole is about public sector pay deals that the new government themselves agreed to after they came into office. Now, whether the Conservative government would have made a different decision on that, is up for debate. But, those were decisions that the new UK government made. So, there are definitely things that were unexpected and that they didn't know about, and the OBR have made that clear today. But there were other things that were, down to the decisions that they have made since coming.
Thank goodness you're here tonight. A gentleman in the back row with the glasses. Yes, on you go. Yes.
Willie, Rennie mentioned social care. I don't think it was mentioned in the budget statement this afternoon. I might be wrong. It seems to keep being kicked into the long grass by all political parties. Would the future of social care not be best being discussed as a non-partisan, non-party political issue by all concerned?
Thank you. Thank you. I'll bring that to the panel in just a second. Lady in the black top in the front row. Yes.
Going back to the question of what Scottish people need, I was 8 years old when 130,000 new green jobs were promised. Not even half of those have materialised. What the Scottish people need, and I as a young person, I'm 22, I graduate next year, I don't know what kind of climate or economy I'm going to grow old in. We need a green jobs guarantee. We need to end oil and gas. We need to stop any new gas from Peterhead, thank you. We need the budget to have been much more ambitious. We saw £28 billion rescinded in terms of the climate pledge that Labour had made. They could have put a tax 2% on assets over £10 million, which would have raised £24 billion that could have gone to climate investment. We need mass investment, and I don't think we're seeing sufficient. It's scary to know that 1 in 4 children in Scotland is going hungry. Meanwhile, the rich line their pockets and just keep getting richer. We need to be having conversations about taxing the rich so that we can fund the economy.
Thank you. Thank you. And lady on the aisle, down here, yes.
To answer your question about my priority, health and social care. Social care wasn't mentioned in the budget. And at the moment, my granddaughter is in an Edinburgh hospital. She's 5 months old and she's been in hospital practically all her life and is having wonderful care. However, I am really concerned about the money that's coming is great, but is it going to stay in the public sector? Wes Streeting's strategy, is that going to privatise the NHS?
Willie, Rennie, let's just pick up. I'll come to you, Paul, in just a second, but social care, you've talked about this a lot, Willie. Are you convinced that the money will go to where it needs to go here in Scotland?
Well, it needs to, and part of my job is to make sure that it does. But the thing that concerns me most is that for years we've taken the social care sector for granted. We think we could keep people on low wages, where they work for very long hours, incredibly hard, mostly women who are doing this job, and they are integral to the functioning of the NHS. Because if we don't have the social care packages, we can't get the people out of the hospital, and they're even more expensive spaces in hospital. So the flow is just blocked, and that's why we have accident and emergency units with ambulances queuing outside. So we need to invest in social care. You can earn more now working in Tesco and Asda than you can working as a social care worker. That needs to change, and that's why Liberal Democrats are in favour of a special minimum wage for those in the social care sector. Because there is no point in going on about a national care service with some big bang reorganisation when we don't solve the fundamentals, and that is investing in our workforce the people who deliver the service. Because if we carry on as we are, I think the system will break down. We have a broken social care system and we'll have a broken NHS if we don't act quickly.
Rachael Hamilton, where do you think the spending priorities of the Scottish Government should be based on this budget settlement?
Well, obviously, the audience are very keen on reversing the winter fuel payment. I think that there is an ability for the Scottish Government to be able to use the money that is flowing from the United Kingdom Government to be able to do that. They may bring in some sort of means testing, but there are 900,000 pensioners. And of those pensioners, you know, they're not rich pensioners. Even those who have a small private pension, if they're topping up their state pension, they don't actually meet the criteria for the pension credit, tax credits. We really do need to look after our older and vulnerable people, because this year it's predicted that energy costs will rise around about £150. And we know that Scotland's obviously you know, a fairly cold place. So the prediction is that older people will die. But on the social care, on the National Care Service, I think we need to be really clear. So far, the Scottish Government have spent 30 million on looking at the proposal of creating a National Care Service. That just speaks to me of an inefficient use of money. We should already be delivering a care service. COSLA have rejected it, and all the other parties in the Parliament are questioning, even the Green Party are questioning the proposal of the National Care Service. In my opinion, we need to be looking at the inefficiencies of the delivery of governance at the moment. So we need to make the NHS more productive, and that could be, for example, putting money into creating Saturday surgeries or something along those lines to catch up with all the procedures that are in that sort of big logjam. There are so many things that we can do that don't actually need to cost money. We can make efficiencies, we can cut quangos of 131 quangos that cost 19 million. They spend money on foreign embassies, cost 9 million. These are things that we can look at if we can afford what we do and what we need to do to meet the priorities of the people of Scotland.
Okay, gentleman in the black jacket and black shirt down here, second row, yes.
Thank you very much for today. I'd like to hear from the panellists about their expectations when it comes to investment in researching new technologies such as artificial intelligence, which might pose significant role and risks when it comes to healthcare, automation of jobs, job losses, and various other risks.
Okay, that's a huge question. I'm not sure we're going to have time for that, to get through all of that this evening. But on the healthcare aspect of it, just answer on that issue of social care in Scotland, how we're going to fund that, how there'll be enough money for social care. And that lady's point, where are the green elements, the green priorities in this budget today? They didn't jump out for her.
Well, the budget today, on the green issue first, and those jobs of the future, which are vitally important, I agree with you, and ensuring that we have investment, green investment. I mean, that's why GB Energy has been at the centre of our platform, and also why we have passed the bill this week to create that publicly owned company that will invest in renewables and in renewable jobs across Scotland. It will be headquartered here in Aberdeen, and it will ensure that there is investment. We have to be really clear about the future for that industry and make sure there is a just transition away from oil and gas. That is so important. And it's why we prioritised, yet again in the budget today, a windfall tax on the oil and gas giants who are making eye-watering profits through extraction in the North Sea and elsewhere. And we have said that we will continue that windfall tax. That, of course, is not supported by the SNP, who seem to think it's absolutely fine for those profits to go on unchecked. So,
and the funding for the NHS and social care?
And on that point, I think it's very important. You would have heard Rachael Rees say today that in 1945, it fell to the Labour Party to rebuild Britain from the ashes of the war. We created the NHS. It is our greatest achievement and our proudest achievement. We will always protect the NHS. That is absolutely a fundamental for the Labour Party. priority. And here in Scotland, we've had 17 years of the SNP running our NHS, quite frankly, into the ground. Social care is on its knees. It needs proper investment. I don't think that the National Care Service, I think it has been a debacle, quite frankly. I think you've had the trade unions, for example, lining up to say it will not make a single bit of difference in terms of the pay of social care workers that Willie was talking about, or the services that are offered to people on the ground. So that needs to be thought again very quickly.
I think you do a disservice to the people working into the NHS to describe it that way. Yes, there are pressures, but there are also major achievements in the NHS.
This is what your government's decisions.
I want to go back to the point.
Don't use them as a shield.
I want to go back to the gentleman at the back who said that we should be looking, and it is the equivalent of a National Health Service, a National Care Service that changes completely and fundamentally how do we actually deliver for the people that are missing from the National Care Service debate are the users. And if you want to go back and read the Philly report, it's one of the best reports I've seen in terms of what we need to do with an ageing population is how do we make sure we can help support people, preferably in their home, with a good support service. Willie's right, one of the big changes and the challenges is about people that are should be discharged from hospitals and aren't. But what really saddens me is the point that we are now a minority government. So we are only ever going to get anything through with everybody working together. And I think that the point made about if we're really serious about really getting to grips with the issue around social care and particularly care of the elderly in a changing environment, we need to do this on a cross-party, collective basis and leave the politics at the door, because this change is not just for tomorrow, this change is for decades to come.
Your views on everything you hear on the programme. The hashtag is BBCDN on social media. We're in Edinburgh tonight. Next Wednesday, the day after the American election, we're going to be in Aberdeen, new headquarters for GB Energy. If you want to come along and be part of the audience for that programme, just go to the website. It's bbc.co.uk/debate night. Right, enough budget. Let's move on to our second question of the night, which comes from Joshua. Joshua Scanlon. Evening, Joshua.
Good evening. The population of Edinburgh is set to increase by 10% by 2040, and more young people than ever are feeling priced out of the city. As someone who's just finished 4 years of university here and wants to continue to live here, what can be done about the desperate lack of appropriate housing in the capital?
Joshua, thank you. Tell us about your situation. Were you in university accommodation, and now, where are you living now?
No, so I never stayed in university accommodation. I had to find somebody else that I knew that was looking to stay, because the only way we could even begin to look at staying privately out with university accommodation was to split everything down the middle. We're paying through the nose for an average flat. It's fine, it's not in the centre of town, there's still a bit of travel time, and the prices just keep going up.
Yeah, a housing emergency here in Edinburgh. The average cost of a house in Edinburgh now £339,000. Paul O'Kane, what needs to be done to help young people like Joshua get a home?
Well, in the budget today, in terms of what's happening in England, you've seen the Labour government committed to ensuring that we tackle the housing crisis and making sure that we invest in social housing and housing for a social rent, but also to make sure that we're building more houses for people to buy and to get an affordable mortgage in order to buy them. And
ripping up some planning laws. Planning is a big issue in this,
That does
isn't
involve difficult decisions and being quite bold and quite brave in terms of the planning legislation. Yes, trying to bring communities with us, but being clear that we have a crisis that we need to look at. Now, here in Scotland, obviously, housing is devolved. We've seen a massive cut by the SNP government to the housing capital budget that is there to build affordable and social homes. We've seen a slowing of building, and we've seen the real challenges that you articulate quite clearly here tonight, particularly in the east of the country. So we need to have a very clear plan, and we've got to look at our planning system. I don't think tinkering around the edges is going to work. We're going to have to take a root and branch review, and we have to make sure that we're building houses that can adapt with people throughout their lives as well. I think that's really important. When I was in the council as a councillor, I used to see the frustration that people, when they reached older age or if they had a disability in later life, that they couldn't get a house that was adaptable to them. So we need to look at that, and the planning system needs to be reformed.
Does that mean that some communities where new houses are being built who are uncomfortable with that, they just need to suck this up because we're in a housing emergency? Is that what you're saying?
Look, I've outlined there is a massive crisis, there's a challenge, and yes, we have to try and take communities with us, but it's clear to me that there's going to have to be investment in new houses, and that's going to have to happen in communities across Scotland and across the UK.
Fiona Hyslop.
So one of the problems in the housing budget was the financial transactions, which is a loan agreement with the UK government, was taken away. I think there's an opportunity. We discussed about capital priorities. I know that's going to be a priority for the Scottish Government. The challenge we've got is the population of Scotland is effectively moving from the west, from Glasgow, areas like that are getting smaller, right over to the east. I represent West Lothian. I've got more constituents than any other MSP in the whole of the country because it's expanding like Edinburgh is. So it's the affordability issue. And reflecting on West Lothian, it was the SNP there that first put a planning requirement. You'd have to have 25% of social housing in any housing development. Now that's widespread across the area. So if there is to be building of new houses, we have to make sure that it's affordable, because we want young families, we want people not to be spending their time sofa surfing, but to be able to have accommodation. I think Edinburgh's got particular challenges, and as I said, I'm not an expert on the Edinburgh situation, but I do think that in terms of generating economic growth for good, and I talk about the wellbeing economy here, which I think is perhaps reflecting the gentleman at the front, how do you make sure that you're using your investment for a social good as well as an economic driver? Because we know housing investment brings jobs for those that are building houses, etc. So I most definitely think that is a way forward that covers those areas of social need, but also economic growth.
OK, homes are for people. Let's see what people think. Front row.
In Edinburgh, the amount of buildings that are being knocked down, and it's not social housing, it's student housing. And people are just, you know, I mean, it's now come a running joke in Edinburgh. You see that there's a new building going up, oh, it'll be student housing. And then you move into East Lothian. East Lothian have some, there's huge swathes of what was green belt being built on. It's not social housing. It's 5 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms at extortionate prices. Young people haven't got a chance of buying them. You know, and yes, and I have to say in East Lothian, having taught in East Lothian, there's an awful lot of people moving into East Lothian because it's the golfing centre of the world, just about, according to East Lothian. And things, you know, but you know, but it's all sort of, it's not for young people. It's not, you know, my grandchildren, I don't see how they're going to have a chance of getting housing.
OK, Willie and Rennie, what do we do about this?
I think you'll find that St Andrews is the home.
Oh, don't. Here we go.
Signs coming up in Lothian, you know.
We'll argue about this later.
But I've never seen the housing situation as bad as it is now. I was first elected in 2006, and it was tough then. It was difficult to find homes for people who were in social need. But now, housing officers in my area have almost given up. They're saying there is nothing. The movement is very limited from one house to the next, so the space is available for people in need. Before we even move on to the private sector, and my concern here is that the cumulative effect of lots of well-meaning pieces of legislation has resulted in the housing sector, the private housing construction sector, making decisions perhaps not to invest here, but to invest south of the border instead. Now, that's got to change. And part of that is the planning system. And Paul's right, this is a difficult decision to make. But the new National Planning Framework number 4 has meant there is a much more limited availability of space for building homes. And that's having a dramatic impact on the confidence of the sector to invest and build the homes that we need. So, of course, one of the first things that the Scottish Government needs to do is to reverse the cut to the social housing budget, but it also needs to make changes to the regulation that it's got in place so that people like yourself are able to have at least a hope of getting a chance. I've got children, I think, who are the same age as you, and they would love to get a property at some point. But they are struggling, and I think it's important that people like that have the opportunity like I had the opportunity. But just now, because of the regulation, because of the investment, and because of the social housing budget, that's not available.
Will you take, Fiona Hyslop, a part of the budget settlement that you've received today and look again at that cut to the social housing budget?
I am absolutely convinced that the Scottish Government will look at housing as a priority, but I cannot pre-announce anything. I can't speak for the Finance Secretary. So in terms of my view, I think...
you should look at it again.
I think we should. I'm arguing against myself because obviously as the Transport Secretary, I want funding and transport. But that's the point about collective responsibility, is to make the decisions in the best interest of the Scottish people.
Let's hear from the audience. Gentleman with the beard, yes.
Talking about the housing affordability situation, so if you're homeless and you go to local council you're putting into these temporary accommodations, which could be a building with numerous occupation, and if you work full time, you can be charged up to 60% of your income, which is then diverting people from going to these places and maybe living in not as nice situations, whether it be couch surfing, because they either stay working and pay the 60% or stop working. Is there anything that could be looked at that? Or?
Yeah, I think new figures out saying that in Edinburgh by 2040 there could be 4,500 households in temporary accommodation. I'll pick that up in a second. Gentleman with the moustache as well in your row. Yes, on you go.
Yeah, the Edinburgh City Council posted today on their social medias about the tourist tax that's coming in and how we should spend it. Is there any way that the Scottish Government could put pressure on them to spend it, perhaps on social housing?
Oh, to ring-fence it?
Yeah.
Specifically for that. Let me just take one more. Gentleman on the aisle here, yes.
Yes, there's over 2,000 empty properties in Edinburgh and they should be brought into use. The City of Edinburgh Council did issue a licensing scheme for short-term holiday lets, but I still think there's far too many in the city. There are properties in Edinburgh which were built as social housing. They've been taken over by private landlords to make profit. These houses should be used for people to live in, not for profit.
Thank you. So it's a complex picture, this, but it still leaves Joshua looking for a home. Rachael.
Well, Joshua, I represent Ettrick, Roxburgh and Berwickshire, which is a very rural area, and it is experiencing somewhat depopulation, where young people are moving out. We've got a fantastic single-track railway that runs from Tweedbank to Edinburgh. We have a lot of empty homes. We also have a pressure on the local authority planning department because we have a lot of applications for renewables. So people who are trying to build houses or, you know, the projects that are in the pipeline are not sort of, the administration is being held up because of there's not enough capacity within the planning department. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do. Obviously, the increase in the capital budget from the UK government is going to help, but it's how the SNP choose to prioritise that in the budget itself. They're also way behind with their affordable home building, and some of the legislation that Rennie was talking about has not done anything to help the housing market. It's effectively contracted the availability of rental accommodation because private landlords have got out of the market because it just isn't worth their while anymore. So I think there's a whole perfect storm situation here where we really need to do a root and branch look at how we can make sure that we can keep young people in Scotland. There's a lot of people leaving Scotland right now to seek work elsewhere for a better lifestyle, for example. There are a lot of people leaving Scotland for certain jobs, you know, because of the conditions in, say, in Australia for nurses and doctors.
There's more people moving to Scotland,
Yeah,
Rachel.
yes, from the UK, the rest of the UK. Yeah, there are quite a lot of people moving up to Scotland.
Because it's good. They like it.
Strange, because we are the highest tax part of the United Kingdom. But so please, Josh, I would say, you know, let's make rural areas around Edinburgh attractive as well as the city, because the city will not be able to absorb that amount of people by 2040.
Josh, you fancy moving to Roxburghshire? Sounds like you've got...
Yeah, I'll consider it, yeah.
West Lothian's nice. West Lothian's nice. Or Fife. Mairi Spowage.
Yes, I mean, the spending by the government isn't enough here. So some of the issues that Willie Rennie touched upon are in the sort of cumulative changes to regulations of the private rented sector. From speaking to businesses who invest in the sector across the UK, across the world, have definitely impacted on investor confidence. That's both those who partner up with social landlords and housing associations to build, because that money, some of that money comes from private investors as well.
So how do you get that confidence back, Mairi?
It's difficult, but because I think a lot of investors in property now see Scotland as a kind of difficult place to do business, and they can build more easily south of the border, particularly in the build-to-rent market, because although many people can and should have an aspiration to build a home, to buy a home one day. You know, we need a good supply of private rental properties. The social sector will not ever be able to provide enough properties for the people who need rental properties. And the supply of rental properties, particularly in Glasgow and Edinburgh at the moment, is just far too low for the demand, which means what we're seeing is you know, huge escalations in the prices that are being charged. And particularly when people are trying to move because of some of the regulations, that's when you're seeing big step-ups in rents that are charged, because that's the only opportunity the landlords can have sometimes to put up rentals. So, you know, these, as Willie Rennie says, some of these are well-meaning in terms of trying to protect tenants, but some of them have had unintended consequences in terms of the private rental market.
And to be fair, Paul McLennan, the Housing Minister, is taking a good look at all of these issues.
OK, your views on that, wherever you live in Scotland, the hashtag is BBCDN. Let's go to our third question of the night, which comes from Sally Wainwright. Sally, good evening.
Good evening. The Scottish Government just announced it recognises 24 genders. Does the panel agree?
This is formal guidance issued to public bodies by the Chief Statistician. 24 genders to be recognised, from pan-gender to demi-gender. Sally, what do you think?
As a lesbian feminist, I've spent my entire life arguing against gender stereotyping. I think this kind of ideology actually solidifies it. We could be much more inclusive if we simply encouraged and allowed everybody to present and be how they wanted without having to attach labels to themselves. I'm very concerned, particularly today, we've been talking about responsible government spending. You know, how many hundreds of thousands of pounds has the Scottish Government wasted on this misogynist and deeply homophobic ideology? It seems to me that the person who wrote the list, and this shows, I think, some of the misspending of the money, doesn't even understand the ideology within its own terms. Okay. Because some of the genders, some of the words on that list don't fit any definition of gender.
Okay. All right, thank you, thank you. Rachael Hamilton, you've called for the term cisgender to be banned at Holyrood, just across the road from us tonight. Cis, of course, being where gender corresponds to sex assigned at birth. What do you think about the recognition of 24 different genders by the Scottish Government?
Well, I mean, to touch on your point there about why I've written to the presiding officer to ban the term cisgender, I mean, the definition of that is that you were assigned female at birth. I think, you know, we have two sexes, and we have, you know, I don't want to be called cisgender in the chamber itself. I just think it's disrespectful. And that's my opinion. I got a lot of signatures to that letter. So we'll see what the presiding officer says to that.
Are there 24 genders?
No, there's not 24 genders. I mean, I looked at the list of 24 genders. One of them is questioning. I don't think questioning is a gender. I think it's a complete and utter waste of taxpayers' money looking into this. We have so many more issues that concern the public right now. People who are, you know, on the breadline, people who are homeless, people, we've got kids living in poverty in Scotland. We've got the highest drug deaths in Europe. There are so many things that we need to be concentrating on. I think we should actually have learnt our lesson from the kind of concentration that the SNP brought to the Parliament on the ideological issues around you know, gender reform. And I think it's really important that we recognise that, you know, the majority of people, their opinion of that legislation, about 72% of the public didn't agree with that legislation. Okay, right. So I think they just need to learn the lesson.
OK. 24 genders, Fiona Hyslop. Explain.
There isn't, and I think the list is a descriptor that has been put together for identification purposes by statisticians, but I think it's been used in a way to try and describe a situation that doesn't influence policy. I think it's a descriptor for forms for those in a situation where they don't see themselves fitting into other descriptors, and I think that's what it is, as a descriptor. So I don't think there are. 24 genders.
OK, yeah, I think John Spinney has said he recognises there are 2 genders. Mairi Spowage, you are a statistician.
Yep.
Is it useful, if this was done for statistical reasons, is it useful when there's so much doubt and confusion over what categories actually mean?
So I saw this story when it came up recently, so was interested to look into the sort of the facts of the reporting and what it actually was. And my understanding is that this is a way to code an open text box. So somebody writes in how they feel that they wish to identify, and this was guidance to data processors to be able to put it into the categories that people categorising the census have used. So it was to, if you want to do it and the way the census was done, then this is. So I don't think it's quite the way it was described, i.e. that this would be something that would be collected from everybody that was interacting with public services. But more broadly, for statistical and research purposes, statisticians and researchers do want to categorise people because it can tell us something about outcomes, the way people are experiencing public services, perhaps difficulties or issues people, kind of encounter. And some of these debates can be sensitive, particularly when they're about how you identify. For example, I remember there was a lot of controversy in up to the 2011 census about the ethnicity question that was asked and the different terms that were used in that, because again, that's quite sensitive. So these things can be sensitive, but it can be helpful to categorise.
We're running out of time here. We've got a couple of minutes. Briefly, Paul O'Kane.
I mean, I think Mairi makes an important point about statisticians and what is the purpose of this and why has it happened. And I haven't looked at the full list as described, and I know that Rachel's raising it tomorrow and there have been a variety of issues raised. I think what's important is making sure that the Scottish Government is working with whoever its statisticians are and making sure that, as Mairi has kind of outlined, what is the purpose of this? What is it for? Why would it be used? And exactly, I think, explaining and communicating that really clearly is important.
OK, Willie, Rennie.
I mean, I understand, the concerns that many women have who feel about the protection of their identity. I get that. I feel the vulnerability that many of my constituents experience. But I also feel the vulnerability that many people who have different beliefs in terms of their identity. And I want a country that protects both of those groups of people. And it's not an either-or. It has got to be an opportunity to reach out and have compassion for the people who find difficulties without causing difficulties for other people. That's why I'm a liberal. And the debate has been at times difficult, and I found it really difficult to enter the debate, which is why I have to say, when you asked the question, my heart just sank, because I know every time we talk about these issues, it inflames tensions. But I just hope we can get to a position where we have compassion from all sides, which I think is possible, but is incredibly challenging.
Willie, we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed. Your views, hashtag is BBCDN on social media. That's it for tonight. We're back with you next week in Aberdeen. Have a look at our website, bbc.co.uk. For more information, you can come along and join us there. If you missed any of tonight's show, we're repeated a little bit later on BBC One Scotland, or you can catch it any time on the BBC iPlayer. Thank you very much indeed to my panel here tonight, and to our audience in Edinburgh, and to you at home for watching as well. We'll see you next week in Aberdeen. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well. From all of us in Debate Night, good night.